This video is your introduction into Shadow Slave, the web novel that broke all the records and clawed its way into the big three. So what is Shadow Slave? Well, it's an English web novel written by a man named Guilty3. It has elements of a progression fantasy, it's Souls-like, has a system, and it typically has dark themes. The reviews for Shadow Slave come in at 4.68 out of 5, and this has over 4,000 total rankings. Shadow Slave is also the #1 most viewed web novel with over 45 million views, which coincidentally enough puts it as the #1 most pirated web novel. So what made Shadow Slave break through all the rankings and become the #1 web novel? Well, I'm going to give it straight to the main character, Sunless. He's best described as this curious coward who grew up on the outskirts, and he lives a life of deceit and only focuses on his own survival. If you want to think of an animal that relates to him, I want you to think of a cockroach. Sunny really solidifies himself as one of the best protagonists of all time when he enters his first nightmare. Now, a little bit of world building for you here. A nightmare is what happens when someone gets infected by the nightmare spell, which is basically like a disease that spread across the whole entire world that infects certain people from certain age groups. And when you get selected by it, you have to face a nightmare, which is a trial. And if you live, you actually get to get supernatural powers. But of course, if you fail the trial, you end up dying and becoming a horrific monster. Now, Sunny's first nightmare put him as a slave in a slave caravan that was going through a mountain. While already being half dead, he had to face an almost impossible challenge of fighting this absolutely overpowered monster while also having to lie and deceive other people around him. Now, spoilers alert here, he was chased into a ruined temple of a long forgotten god, and he spilled his blood on a sacred altar. The gods were dead, and yet they listened, and he was able to actually kill the monster that was chasing him and become one of the only people to get a true name as well as a divine aspect in his first nightmare. And a little bit about the rankings and how these aspects work is you have Dormant as the lowest, and it goes all the way down to Divine, which is what he got, which is the highest. Now we see that Sunny is this cool coward cockroach guy who lies and tricks other people, but what makes him such a good protagonist? Well, I'm going to give that straight to his flaw. Now, a flaw is what you get after you complete a nightmare because things can't be perfect. They always need a flaw. And his flaw matches perfectly and is probably the best flaw in the whole entire series, and it's that he can never tell a lie. Now, I think we can all imagine the situations that Sunny gets put into whenever he has to lie, but he literally can't because he's forced to tell the truth. It is absolutely peak. I love the way that Guilty3 wrote his flaw. Now, Sunny isn't the only reason that this web novel is great. You also have the absolutely amazing world building as well as the setting on where these things take place. Now, this is going to be a little bit confusing, but stay with me here. You have your waking world, which is where people like me and you are going to be at before we complete the first nightmare and we're just living in our normal world. And then you have the dream realm, which is full of nightmare creatures, full of absolutely insane threats, as well as some people in there who've already completed their first nightmare. And this is separate from where the nightmares take place, which is its own trial in itself that's kind of similar to the dream realm. After the first nightmare, Sunny goes back to the waking world and gets to relish in his victory, but that's only short-lived because he's thrown right back into the dream realm, which is where he has to face yet another threat. And this is where we get to Volume 1's main setting, which is the Forgotten Shores. The Forgotten Shores is an absolutely beautiful but harrowing place at the same exact time. During the day, you have to traverse on the ground through a crimson coral labyrinth. In this labyrinth is monsters that no one person should be able to take down, especially after just completing their first nightmare. And that's where we get introduced into Sunny's main cast of Nephis and Cassie. These three team up to make an absolutely insane trio of a seer, a swordsman, and a cockroach. They team up to take down the monsters during the day, but at night is whenever the real challenge starts because the water around them rises and the coral labyrinth gets covered by a black ocean, and they have to go on top of high ground to take shelter from it. If you are in this ocean whenever the black water is there, you are basically dead. There's way too powerful of monsters for anyone, no matter what level you are, to take on. Everything about this first volume just screams peak. You have the absolutely insane trio, you have the good world building, you have the insane lore building, you have the insane fights. Everything is just amazing. Now, some minor spoilers here, but this thing really does take a lot of inspiration from Elden Ring or Souls-like genre. For example, they have this soul devouring tree, which will trap people there who are around them and try to convince them to take care of it. And this is where we see Sunny, Nephis, and Cassie get trapped inside of this soul tree and have to find a way out. I think that Guilty3 almost peaked in his writing at this moment because you get to see this absolutely insane situation go down, and I won't spoil how this actually plays out, but I loved it. Now you might be wondering, what are Sunny's abilities? Well, if you take a look at the title, it says Shadow Slave, and that's exactly what he controls: shadows. And this leads to a beautiful symbolic relationship with someone who's in his little cohort, which is Nephis. She actually has the ability to cleanse people of their wounds and also burn through things with her flames. She is like the light, and he is like the darkness. And of course, in Shadow Slave, there's a lot more than what I'm mentioning here. Just to name a couple of things that I think you should look forward to off the top of my head would be the next nightmares that come out, because that's one of my favorite parts, and it definitely will be your favorite parts. The exploration of the dream realm. You get to know more about the people in power. You get to know more about how the power system works. You get to see people level up that you wouldn't expect to actually be able to level up to that level. It's kind of hard to explain, but I honestly think that you should give this a read. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a proper introduction video without telling you where to read it. Now, you can support the author Guilty 3 on webnovel.com, but after chapter 50 or so, I believe, is when the chapters become locked and you have to pay to actually read them. Now, what you definitely shouldn't do is you definitely shouldn't go to lightnovel.pub to read all the chapters completely for free, or you definitely shouldn't just type into Google Shadow Slave chapters free online. And also, you definitely shouldn't go to the App Store and download Novel Reader, which is available completely for free to read everything for free. If I didn't convince you to read Shadow Slave in this video, maybe you can give me another try by watching this video that's going to be showing on screen on why you should read Lord of the Mysteries. And if you want more web novel content, which I know you are desperate for, then I need you guys to subscribe, comment down below, and also like this video so that way you can support me to make more content.